Good evening, Anand. Welcome to Augment Capital's Be Informed sessions that we are doing with leading industry experts. And this on fixed income, Saurabh. Thank you so much for coming on board and talking to us and our investors indirectly. To give a quick background about Saurabh, Saurabh is the head of fixed income at DSP Investment Managers, and he has about 18 years of work behind him, and all in domestic fixed income markets. He started his career with sales intermediation, and he has had various roles in fixed income verticals, which including managing fixed income portfolio for corporate treasury, government-owned retirement fund, and being an integral part of a large private bank treasury. So there's loads of experience, and I know you're known to be among the very few interest rate experts in the industry, Saurabh. So it will be good to kind of hear your views on a lot of fixed income happenings around us. With that note, Saurabh, I would like to begin this session. One of the first things that I would want to kind of know from you is 2020 has been a very, very interesting year as far as fixed income goes. All the years preceding, we have pushed aggressively. We have nudged the RBI for rate cuts, and in the past, banks have lent recklessly all around. In 2020, we see rapid softening of rates and a good transmission record so far. But it's also been a case of excess liquidity with banking system and reluctance to lend that comes along with it. So how do you see the credit cycle picking up from here? So very stuck to two versions, but how do you see the credit cycle picking up from here?
Firstly, for a credit cycle to pick up, it of course denotes that your growth cycle is picking up. And the drivers for growth can only be two: public investment and private investment. Through this entire phase, after the government was re-elected in 2019, forget the COVID phase in itself. Post the government election, one thing what we've seen is the fiscal response of the government is relatively muted or restrained, if I can use that term. And this implies that the public expenditure is not there to push the growth cycle. And from a private expenditure perspective or a private investment perspective, as the overall growth momentum is low because of lack of public investment and spare capacities in the system, there will be a lag in this entire growth phase coming back. Additionally, we came into this COVID or this pandemic with a relatively slower growth cycle, and about a year before now, still the outlook on interest rates was relatively on a higher side. So with relatively higher interest rates prevailing in the system, it took a little bit more time for RBI also to come up, infuse liquidity, bring down the cost of money, and we are still in the midst of that process. So to answer in a nutshell, the public investment will initially drive, followed by, and the mantle will then eventually pass on to private investment, which is the way ahead for a sustainable growth cycle.
Okay, got it. So you do see a lot of private investment picking up in the medium term. I mean, immediately things still look very hazy and uncertain. But you're confident of that the private investment will pick up maybe a year from FY22 is what we've been talking about in general.
It's difficult to predict the time. It will only pick up once the government expenditure starts picking up shape. And as of now, government is largely restraining itself or its expenditure because we are still in the midst of a pandemic. And we expect that government expenditure to push up once we are closer to the end of this pandemic, and then eventually the mantle will move to the private investment. We can't put a time to this because unlike the previous crisis, be it 9/11 or global financial crisis or the taper tantrum, this one is we are still in the midst of this. The earlier three ones were largely triggers, and within a month or two, we would start the corrective exercise. As this one is a little bit more prolonged, government is also keeping its ammunition reserved to come out and spend. Most importantly, from Indian perspective, the political risks are behind us,
Yeah.
and hence government can buy a little bit more time to come up with these measures, and that's the reason we are not seeing a repeat of uh, something what we saw in 2009, the Narega farm loan waiver, subsidies, uh, and the fiscal expansion which we saw, and which got growth, but somewhere it diluted or it compromised the overall immunity of the economy, uh, which which potentially leads to some other form of risk which we were exposed to in 2013. And in this context, today where we stand, we don't seem to be in a rush to turn the tide on growth, and which is allowing overall, be it interest rates or currencies, to remain a lot more uh, stable for what is happening across the globe.
So, my next question comes on inflation. Uh, last, we saw inflation inching up beyond RBI's comfort zone. A lot of it is being attributed to supply side dynamics, or someone, we were being told that it's about data collection issues in COVID and all. How do you kind of foresee inflation going forward? Would it remain at these levels to kind of, again turn its ugly head on the markets?
Well, in context to the recent inflation trends, one also needs to consider the lockdown and the post-lockdown phase. As we all know, the demand came down considerably, and parallelly, the supply chain were also disrupted. So for about 1.5, 2 months, you hardly had any uh, large form of supply, and with the supply chain disrupted, uh, you had a little bit of an imbalance on the overall ecosystem from production to consumption. As the supply, as the unlock started to improve and as the supply started to improve, what we have seen is the first round effect of the CPI being relatively elevated, which is again a reflective of the phase what we had through April, May, and June, which is getting reflected today. But more importantly, from here on, we don't expect the demand to proportionately increase in line with the supply. So as the supply chain starts to improve and the corresponding demand is largely stable, the overall impact on CPI should start to abate or to reduce. One way of this aspect is also the wedge or the difference between the producer price index, which is WPI, and consumer price index, which is what the RBI tracks or the MPC tracks for its decision making. This difference has been considerably wide, and what it implies is at a producer level, the inflation levels are considerably lower, and hence the WPI is zero or marginally negative, but the CPI is relatively higher. One element, what we believe is the contributor to this is, often because the middlemen effectively add a lot of cost uh, to the overall product. And through this supply chain disruption and through this phase of lockdown, this middleman component or the services component is relatively absent. So if I'm a manufacturer, I don't have much constraint to manufacture, but there is a lag uh, in which this product reaches the shop floor, and hence for a consumer, he is inevitably paying a relatively higher cost, or his costs have not come down, which is leading to this mismatch. Now, if the demand were to pick up, then definitely, if the demand were to pick up, then definitely the consumption as well as production cost will start going up, but we don't expect this demand to pick up. And on the ground, we are in a festive season, and typically we relate this phase with a term called a busy season or a credit season. But we are not seeing the same amount of a festive flavor on the ground. And this is a festive season for Pan India. And we don't expect the festive season, be it Onam or Dasera, Ganpati, and Diwali, to be anywhere close to what we have had in the past. And this implies that the overall demand situation is unlikely to improve. So, and hence, on the ground, how we see this is, if you're given a mid-year bonus, from a layman perspective, if you're given a mid-year bonus, I think still we will be largely content with bread, butter, and Maggie rather than go out and spend heavily. And this, to me, gives a reasonable confidence that inflation, not only because of consumer price index, but also not only because of base effect, but also because of overall supply improving, will lead to the prices coming down once we head into the first quarter of 2021.
Got it.
That's related to that. But RBI, when we read RBI's minutes of the meeting, it doesn't portray this kind of this kind of an understanding, right? I mean, all the members are a little concerned on the inflation side when you read about read the RBI's MOM.
Well, from RBI perspective, let's look back to the December policy, what we had. If you recollect, the phase through December and Jan, the CPI prints were relatively elevated. And that's one of the reasons why we say today the base effect will also play out post December, Jan, because last year, through the same phase, the data was, the CPI data was elevated.
Yeah.
Well, when the mandate for MPC is married to the CPI prints, when you have a 6.5–7% prints on inflation, we do expect their tone to be a lot more sensitive to these higher prints. That's it. None of the MPC members denoted a need for change in stance immediately from accommodative to neutral.
Right.
Forget the case of the reversals of the rate hikes for that matter. And this implies that the outlook on, even from an RBI perspective, in the second half is considerably lower. Although they have refrained from putting a trajectory or putting out a number largely, or a range for CPI for the second half of March end, but the trajectory for the second half is already being put up by the RBI that it would be lower than the first half.
Okay.
And hence we expect the narrative for CPI from MPC to get toned down as we head into the February policy.
Got it. So I had this question around moratorium, which will end in the next 3-4 days or end of August. And then there is also restructuring on cards. So will this relax the credit stress that many companies would have faced till now? And related to that is, what will be the impact of this on banking, where RBI expects GNPA to rise sharply?
Well, firstly, from a credit perspective, a basic thumb rule that what we put in is, for credits to turn good, you need positive growth momentum and lower cost of money.
Right.
Only when you have these two things will credit markets outperform. It is very similar to what we have on duration. For duration to turn good, you need lower government borrowing and lower growth momentum. You can't have both of these things perpetually, and hence you have interest rate cycles.
Right.
In context to moratorium and outlook on credit, a few things have changed for good. And there are a few things which are still unchanged. This is the difference to what we were 3 months back, that few things are unchanged, but a lot of other things are worsening. And what I'm referring to, few things have changed for good, is just the way we denote that a higher government borrowing can crowd out the borrowing or the rates for top-end corporates.
Right.
In the same way, higher borrowing by AAA corporates can crowd out potentially the markets for lower rated corporates. And a very important measure which RBI introduced in March, which is HTM enabled TLTRO. And it's important to note the first part of it, which is HTM enabled. If it was only TLTRO, I think the impact would not have been the same what we have seen now.
Mm-hmm.
HTM enabled TLTRO of about 1 lakh crores ensured that the top rated corporates got money fairly easily, and it addressed two critical aspects for them: the cost of money issue as well as availability of money issue. And as top-end corporates have largely met with their immediate refinance requirements, now you can put out a filtered approach or a focused approach on the sectors, on the industries which need a little bit more pinpointed solutions.
Right.
So this is something which has changed for good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what is unchanged is for the entities who can access bond markets or who can access money markets, or they still have their both the problem solved, or they have a problem of plenty because they have a lot of money now. And there are other segments which are on the peripherals which do not have access to both the bond markets as well as the loan markets. And this is the segment where we see there are still unknowns till the time availability of money is addressed for them. And how this would resolve eventually is when government via banks or via other measures will come up and address these particular sectors in a more pinpointed way. Today we have created the groundwork to look at more of micro sector basis as against the overall macro, because the larger corporates have been largely now taken care of courtesy the HTM enabled TLTRO. So outlook on credit, definitely the sensitivity to credit has improved, and with one of the two things already being sorted, which is cost of money and the low cost of money and the potential growth outlook. With the lower cost of money being already addressed, we expect the sensitivity on these credit markets to remain a little bit more reduced to what we were in March, April. Is it good enough time to take risks or take exposures to lower rated credit? Till the time the yield curve is steep, I think the more favorable risk reward proposition is offered by medium to long end bonds. And once the yield curve flattens, you will have the credit markets doing good.
Okay. So thanks for that, Saurabh. You had something to share. If you want to share the screen.
Sure. My screen visible?
Yes.
A lot of questions, or to the questions which you put in, I just wanted to break the entire thing from an interest rate perspective. The biggest challenge, which is identifying the phase of interest rate cycle. Most importantly, for a fixed income investor, our returns are made through movement in the change or movement in the shape of yield curve or changes to the shape of yield curve. And that's why, often this narrative comes across that RBI has cut rates a lot, but the yields have not yet responded. And when yields start responding, it starts reflecting in our returns or in our portfolios.
Right.
So to identify the phases of interest rate cycle and to get your fixed income investments to get an informed decision on fixed income investments. We call this a FIRE strategy, which is find, invest, ride, and exit. Often this exit term gets missed out, and we end up getting good notional returns, but by the time we start pocketing those returns, it will be very different to what the notional returns used to look like. Purely from a layman perspective, and not to use any technical terms or rocket science, although we at times ascribe fixed income to be a little difficult to understand, this one slide should help to break a lot of myths around it. What we have done is rate cycles play out in 3 phases. They are identified by only 2 components: cost of money and availability of money. In phase 1, when you have a problem of cost of money and problem of availability of money, your yield curve will be flat, but at elevated yields. You can visualize the period of September 2018, or if you want to go back, May 2013, or May, June 2013, when you had a problem of both cost of money and availability of money.
Okay.
Obviously, when money is not available and whatever little is available is very costly, your growth outlook will start to come off. Correct? When your growth outlook starts to come off, you move to phase 2. Like all things in life, we do the easiest thing first. We address the cost of money here by cutting repo rates and infusing a lot of liquidity. But as I mentioned earlier, people who have access to money, they have a problem of plenty, but there are several on peripherals who still have this problem of availability of money.
Right.
And through this phase 2, your yield curve is very steep and your growth outlook typically starts to plateau. So whatever number we get next week, that should be the worst of the numbers what we will get on GDP, and then we should start to plateau and then eventually start to look up. And lastly, you move to phase 3 where your cost of money is already addressed, and your availability of money will also eventually get addressed because of a large amount of liquidity which is sustaining in the system. And through this phase, the yield curve will be again flat, but at lower yields. And when your money is easily available and very cheaply, your growth outlook will start to look positive. And hence, these are very easier ways to identify. And most importantly, what works in which phase from a strategy and a risk reward from an interest rate perspective. In phase 1, when your yield curve is flat at elevated yields and your growth outlook is weaker, your duration and short-term funds will outperform. And when we say strategy, it's largely from 1 year and above perspective.
Yeah.
Why I say duration? Because when your growth outlook is weaker and your government borrowing is expected to be weaker, not coming down lower. In phase 2, your short-term funds outperform. And when I say short-term, it's not the fund in itself, it's the category. And the entire family of corporate bond funds, banking PSU, medium-term funds, and the conventional short-term funds.
So could you also define it in terms of the duration, or what kind of
fund which is between 1 year to 4 year.
1 year to 4 years. Okay.
The duration is largely 4 year and above.
Right.
Short term is 1 to 4 year. And in phase 3, the credits start to outperform and the 1 year roll downs. Credits because your growth cycle has started to turn and your cost of money is cheap. So from an interest rate perspective, in phase 1, your risk is small, but your rewards are high. In phase 2, your risk and reward are almost equal. And in phase 3, your risk is high and your reward is relatively smaller. From an investment perspective, often when we move from phase 1 to phase 2, the return sheets of phase 1 will start looking good. But that doesn't imply that from here on for the next 3 year or a 1 year cycle, the same strategy will work well.
Right.
And hence today where we stand, which is a very steep yield curve, or we are largely in phase 2, we expect a duration profile of 4 ± 1 to do well. And that's the reason why we don't put duration here. the duration will work well. For an investment horizon beyond 1 year, you could be exposed to high amount of volatility. You could get good notional returns, but by the time you start uh, pocketing your returns, the cycle would be closer to the phase 3 part. And hence, this slide largely sums up from the strategies for fixed income and how you derive for each of these strategy from a fixed income perspective. We can always dwell upon how you move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3, which is largely to do with more on the macro factors, which I can explain through the later course of questions, if any.
So in fact, that's a great simple slide, and I think it was very, very nice. I had two questions related to that. If you just go back. So one is, I mean, so we are. I'm assuming we are in phase 2 as of now. That is the first question. Second thing is, I mean, there is also this reverse yield where the short-term ones are higher, and I don't know what they call it, but where the short-term yields are higher than the long-term ones. Third question, which just came to my mind, is if you're in phase 1, credit is going to be a big, I mean, investing in credit funds might be a big, high risk strategy. I mean, these are the three questions that I generally wanted to, check with you.
First, your inference that in phase 2, we are in phase 2, your assumption, it is spot on because you identify that with the
steep curve.
Steepness in the yield curve.
Yeah.
Second was when you are in phase 1, the credit becomes a challenge, obviously, because in phase 1, your growth outlook is weakening. And when your growth outlook weakens, like I mentioned earlier, a very thumb rule, for credit to turn good, you need positive growth momentum and lower cost of money.
Okay.
Through this phase, credit can give you a lot of pain.
Got it.
And that's why I said, often we move with, we invest at times with a lag of one phase. And hence, by the time you reach here, your credit will start looking good on a returns and return sheet perspective, because duration will be very volatile.
Right.
And staying through credit in this phase can give you nightmares. And that's the reason why it's important to identify the right phase of interest rate cycle.
Right.
I forgot your third question.
Third was more on the reverse steep. I mean, I don't know what is
inverse.
Inverse of steep. Yeah.
We haven't seen that sort of a phase in India, and even in emerging markets, rarely such phases come because you are a high risk category as an emerging market, and your central banks typically have finite ammunitions, unlike say US. If the problem when the problem arose in US, he can keep on pumping dollars. We can't do that to a larger extent, and hence in India, typically we don't have an instance of a inverse yield curve which is sustained in the past. Okay. And one thing important to observe here is we never move from phase 2 to phase 1. We always move from phase 2 to phase 3 before we go back to phase 1.
Okay.
And so the reason for that is these are the layers of interest rates. Is it visible?
Yeah, it is.
Layers of interest rates visible, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, these are the layers of interest rates. And as we say layers, if the bottom layer moves up, it will eventually push all the layers higher. So what we call this is at the bottom we have repo rate, then the G-Sec yield, the corporate bonds, and the MCLR. Like I mentioned, if repo rate goes up, it will push the G-Sec yields, it will eventually push the corporate bond yields, and it will eventually push the MCLR yields higher. It also works the same way on the reverse side. When we are in phase one, typically most of these things are flat, but at elevated yields. When we are in phase two, RBI has cut repo rate aggressively, but these segments are yet to come down or keep pace with the repo rate, because movement in repo rate is triggered by outlook on inflation and outlook on growth. But movements in these three layers is triggered only by demand supply. And hence, this runs on aviation fuels and this runs on diesel. So when this moves, this can move really fast. And this one takes its own sweet time to move in. So today, when we talk that, the point which I was trying to put in is, you don't move from phase two to phase one, you have to come to phase three.
Right.
Now, if you look at this, these four layers, and if you look at outlook on this, on outlook on repo rate, what would you denote your outlook from here on, say about for next 6 to 9 months? Flat to lower or flat to higher?
Flat to lower.
So the repo rate is not going higher. It is going flat to lower.
Right.
The topmost layer, which is the bank lending rate, what is your outlook? What would you pen the outlook on this? Flat to lower or flat to higher?
Flat to lower.
Flat to lower. In any structure, if the bottommost layer and the topmost layer are headed flat or lower, the layers in middle cannot sustain a reverse direction.
Okay.
Correct?
I got it.
Yeah.
And hence you have to once flatten before you start the reversal.
Right. Got it. Yeah, excellently done. Thank you. So you are showing another slide. I just want to check if you're...
You want to go to the slide?
You were showing another slide. It was an interesting one.
Yeah. So this was more related to the phase one, phase two, and that slide was regarding what moves from the phase one to phase two. 1 second. Before I go into this, which is more of macros, just wanted to highlight one part which you just mentioned about the credits, and the part which I said, the sensitivity on credits. The green line is the AAA corporate bond yield, and the blue line is the lending rate of banks. And this is the data since 2005. And I can, okay, there's a data since 2005, and it's a similar trend what you will see even if it starts from 1998.
Right.
Okay.
The part which I mentioned, the spreads, why we infer, or the layers of interest rates and how we infer from these layers, is whenever the gap between 3-year AAA corporate and the lending rate closes, the AA rated entities or lower rated entities will have their own problem, or the lower rated credits will pose a significant challenge, something what we have seen in September 18 or in 2013. And this is nothing but your phase one of your interest rate cycle. Let me give you an example. In 2018, say the 3-year AAA corporates, because the liquidity was tight, the yields on 3-year AAA corporates went higher than the lending rates of banks.
Right.
If a 3-year AAA corporate goes to the bank, or if for a 3-year AAA corporate, if the bond rates have gone up, he will go eventually to the bank and ask bank for loans. Bank will be more than happy to lend to a AAA corporate. And when a 3-year AAA corporate, or when a AAA corporate will go to a bank, the AA rated corporate will have to wait on sidelines.
Right.
Right.
And this implies that for low rated corporates, it is the problem of availability of money.
Got it.
Or in other words, we have a problem in the credit markets. When this gap starts to open up, the AAA corporate will say thank you to the bank loan, as he will start getting money very cheaply in the bond markets.
Yeah.
Whenever the gap between the lending rates and the AAA corporates increases, you will have the lower rated markets also doing well, or the lower rated credit markets tend to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And hence, the spreads between 3-year AAA and MCLR determine the sensitivity to lower rated credits.
So going by this, I can clearly see that you seem to suggest, or at least I think I at least infer that we can suggest taking positions in credit risk or credit funds now.
Well, I also inferred prior to this that as the yield curve is very steep, and when you are in phase 2, the medium to long end bonds are more favorable rather than the credit. The credit becomes favorable when your yield curve flattens.
Right.
And hence, if you are only looking between AAA and AA, yes, this chart denotes that. But you will have to stomach a fair amount of volatility and fair amount of noise before the yield curve flattens. And hence, at current juncture or at the current steepness of the yield curve, medium to long end bonds, and then the low rated credits.
Saurabh, one of my questions was something that you've already answered quite in detail, but among the last few questions that we had was how should investors play debt now? Which segment to be in? Which you have answered, in your slide earlier. But just a framework on debt, if you can spend 1 or 2 minutes more on this. So with a possible pause on RBI, cutting rates, maybe one more rate cut is what we should expect, and generally lower yields in the market. So how should one make money in the debt funds going forward? What should be an ideal framework? I know you've answered this in the slide, but just taking a step forward here.
In determining the outlook on rates, and when we discuss the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all we look at is these 5 macro data parameters, how these 5 parameters impact liquidity, demand, supply of bonds and currency, and to what extent it is in the price. Now, this reflects a lot of the steepness in the yield curve. This is largely to do with government, and this is largely to do with the regulator. And in two sense, this is where the regulator comes in, and the switch is here. So if you look at how these factors interplay, if your fiscal deficit is higher, then RBI will keep liquidity tight, and the supply of bonds will be accordingly skewed for each to go higher. If your fiscal is not having an impact on inflation, growth, and current account, then your RBI will be more than comfortable in keeping the liquidity sustainably high in the system. So what matters is how these factors interplay to bear an impact on currency and demand supply bonds. Well, a little bit more deeper, how it works is when we are chasing speed in context to the global growth or economic growth, fiscal will push growth, public expenditure effectively will push growth. September 2018, 2009, if you recollect, it's a higher government spending which was pushing growth. The growth, largely measured through consumption, will eventually lead to higher imports, which means higher current account deficit.
Yeah.
When you import more and you have a higher CAD, your currency will depreciate. When your currency depreciates, you will have upside risks to inflation.
Right.
When you have upside risk to inflation, RBI will keep liquidity tight. And then we'll have to rely on their OMO operations just to manage the demand supply of bonds. And this is largely the reflective for phase one. We move to phase two and phase three, then we are chasing mileage. When we are content with 6% economic growth, it's just a number 6%, but when we are content with a relatively slower speed on growth, my fiscal and CAD are largely stable. When my fiscal and CAD are largely stable, there is less risk for inflation and growth from an interest rate perspective. And when my fiscal is stable, that means interest rates in the system will remain benign. And when my interest rates can remain soft, private investment can also come in, because that can eventually induce demand. And hence, in phase two and phase three, when your fiscal is contained, your CAD is also relatively contained because your growth driver is relatively muted. And when your growth is also relatively benign, inflation risks are less. This implies that the immunity of my economy is a lot more stronger. And hence, I have lesser risk on what is happening globally. Imagine a 2013 like of a macro situation and the pandemic arrived. It would have been a very scary scenario.
Right.
Thankfully, the macros were good enough into Feb-March 2013, which allowed the currency eventually to put in the liquidity into the system. Otherwise, it is the same currency which will take out the liquidity from the system when RBI intervenes to protect the steep depreciation in your currency. What we have done over the last 2 months is accreted a considerable amount to our forex reserves, which has positively influenced the demand supply of bonds, which is nothing but steepness in the yield curve.
Got it.
And lastly, when we are in time of crisis, global financial crisis, or right now, when we need fiscal deficit, but if the fiscal is not pushing growth, inflation, or CAD, RBI will continue to support the liquidity and the government bond borrowing. And that's the reason, despite the fears on fiscal, yields are not moving substantially higher because of a potential hope of a RBI support. And this is what determines the move from phase one to phase two to phase three.
Where do you see the repo rate or our own GSEC rates heading in the next 1 year, or let's say 18 months or so from here?
Easier way to denote this, and which relates with a lot of things which I mentioned earlier, is the bigger question today is, when will the interest rate cycles turn? And that is the biggest risk which all of us are trying to immune ourselves from. If you look back again since 2002, 2001, 2002 data, interest rate cycle in the past have turned when the 3-year GSEC or the yield curve is flattened, or the 3-year GSEC yield has just about kissed the repo rate. This happened in most of the phases where the interest rate cycles turned.
Right.
This is yet to happen in this entire phase. This is yet to happen in this entire phase. This is about 2 weeks old data, and hence it's still showing 597. But we expect this gap to at least close between the repo and the 3-year GSEC before signaling the end of rate cycle.
Got it.
And for those phases, the 10-year yields have also come down. The last vicious move, what we have seen in most of these cycles. This is yet to happen, and this is nothing but when repo, 3-year GSEC and the 10-year GSEC get closer, it is phase 3, or the yield curve eventually flattening out. So at current juncture, instead of going into where the repo rate can end on the lower side, or where the 10-year GSEC can come down up to all we can say is 220 basis points spread between the repo and 10-year G-Sec is a fairly attractive opportunity for the medium to long bonds. And if you look at this chart, the red repo and 10-year G-Sec, whenever all these circled parts are the spreads between repo and 10-year G-Sec when they were at 200 basis points. The horizontal line is a 200 basis point spread. Whenever we have been at this 200 basis points, we have seen the yields come off. It doesn't mean that you can't have a bump like this, but it denotes that there is a prospect of possibility for these yields to come down because you can't have a vertical yield curve. And that's one more reason why we believe that the current spreads at around 200, 220 basis points are attractive for medium to long end bonds. Just to conclude this part, and the question which Girish asked, what should the investor do now? For every now, for an investor, the best way to meet your expectations on fixed income is tick these 4 boxes: liquidity, predictability, returns, and lower volatility. And eventually, this is what you need as a fixed income investor to meet your expectations. By liquidity, we imply not the need for money, but by liquidity, it implies your ability of your investments to reset when interest rates move from one phase to another. So the best way to tick all the 4 boxes is apportion your investments between roll down and open-ended. So roll down will take care of liquidity, predictability, and lower volatility. And the open-ended can be then optimized to get your returns.
Got it.
Got that. So this was a crash course in debt investment, I must say. I feel very enriched, to be honest. And thank you so much for taking the time out on a working day. Again, it was
Thank you so much, Saurabh.
Absolutely. Very, very insightful, and looking forward to more such interactions with you. I'm sure our investors will like it.
Thank you. Pleasure being with your team here, Anand and Girish.
Thank you so much, Saurabh. Thanks a lot.